Hello and welcome to the new Raw Umber bark drawing course. In this course you will learn how to draw a bark from start to finish. Along the way you will learn about materials, measuring, shading and finally finishing your drawing, providing you with a set of skills you can apply on any future drawings you do.
If you want change to happen in your work, you have to be willing to try something new and different and to think differently.
Hello and welcome to the new Raw Umber bark drawing course. In this course you will learn how to draw a bark from start to finish. Along the way you will learn about materials, measuring, shading and finally finishing your drawing, providing you with a set of skills you can apply on any future drawings you do.
If you want change to happen in your work, you have to be willing to try something new and different and to think differently.
Hi, I'm Lisa Dingemans and welcome to another Raw Umber live drawing session. This week we will be doing a painting challenge. The way it works is that there will be a picture on the screen for 1 hour and I will be doing a 1 hour painting along with you. I will be giving hints and tips and you'll be able to see my palette. Of course, I will also be in the chat if you have any questions during the video. It's up to you to paint the same picture I'm painting, to download one from the model pack or set up your own still life using the challenge that we line out every week. Make sure to then post your work on Instagram using the hashtag #RawUmberChallenge and we will be able to pick a winner each week. The winner will win £25 worth of Jackson's vouchers. Right, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to the second Raw Umber challenge. This week the challenge will be warm and cool. So I'm gonna do a very simple still life again, just because I don't want to make it too complicated for anyone. But if you have had some experience with oils, feel free to set up your own still life and make it a little bit more interesting. So the reason why I chose this pair, the specific pair, is because it has a red and a green side, basically complementary colors. So for the palettes, I will need my 3 primaries. So I've got my white here, titanium white, got my 3 primaries and my raw umber. In terms of brushes, I'm using a Rosemary & Co. Hog Filbert. Again, they're linked down below if you want to use them in the materials list. And I may also end up using some synthetic brushes near the end. This is just a graduate Daler and Rowney brush. I've got these in various sizes, really good synthetic brush. So those are the 2 types of brush that I will be using. A little bit about the shape of the brush. I'm using flats. So that means they're flat at the end, nice long hairs. I found them really useful for a beginner. I'm using a little bit of Sensador in my dipper. And of course, I always make sure to have loads of tissue. So let's jump straight into the drawing. Now this is a pair, so obviously it's not a huge drawing challenge, but I am just going to do a quick sketch to slightly outline it, and I know where it is on my actual canvas. And I'm just using normal willow charcoal for this. So, like I do for the other drawing sessions, is I just place it on the canvas first, big stuff first. And you may also want to start thinking about composition. For instance, right now I decide I want it a little bit lower on the canvas, so I just take the whole drawing and just drop that down. And once I've got an idea for roughly where I want it on the canvas, I'm just going to add the biggest shadow shape. So I've got an idea what is the difference between that light shape and that dark shape, because I will need different mixes for that. Make sure you have it on the canvas where you want it, not in the corner somewhere. Make sure that your composition is pointing towards the pair. So let's give that a little spray once you're ready with the composition. I'm going to do this off camera, just because of the fumes, and then I'll get back in a second. I'm using a Daler and Rowney fixative, but hairspray works just as well. Now, for those of you who are new to oil painting and color, just want to talk a little bit about pigments here. So as you can see, the yellow is very, very transparent. White, however, is very, very opaque. So if I put a bit of white with that yellow, very quickly it becomes lighter and a lot stronger, a lot more opaque. You don't see my palette shining through that yellow anymore. So we will be using direct paint, so no transparent pigments. So whenever you find something is a little bit too transparent, just add a tiny touch of white. Now, some people ask me about cleaning. What I tend to do is I just dip it into my Sensador and then just wipe it off the tissue. I always have a bin next to me, make sure that I can immediately throw away my tissue, and I just keep wiping until I don't see a lot of pigment coming off anymore. And I try to keep my brushes fairly clean. I don't always use the Sensador, I just tend to clean them after every time I touch the canvas. And it's just a good habit to have, especially with colors. You want the mix to be really nice and clean. A little bit about how to handle your brush. When you're picking up your raw umber or any other color, make sure that you only brush it on the tip of the brush. Let me just get some more raw umber here. So when I put my brush in, I only wipe the very, very tip. Don't scoop it up. Try and just gently wipe the front of the bristles. When you're putting paint directly out of the brush, you can see that the mark doesn't glide nicely. It will release at first and then let go. If you want to have some texture, that's great, but you don't always want that. So in order to make it more transparent, just grab a bit of Sensador and mix that into the paint. It should be roughly the consistency of house paint. So you can see that spreads a lot better. So now when I put that on, it's a little bit better, but still not quite as good. So a little bit more Sensador. And make sure you hold your brush at the very, very end like you would when using charcoal. And you can see now it's a lot more spreadable and also a little bit more transparent. So it's a lot easier to spread the paint around. And this is great for a lot. You don't always want this. You may want a little bit of texture, but what I tend to do for the background now is now we've got a nice, clear, even stroke. And that is the consistency that I want my paint for most of the painting. Okay, so I'm now just going to use that to cover the whole canvas. Just gives me an imprimatur or a ground layer that I can paint on top of. I don't personally love working on a white canvas. You can use a bit of tissue to just spread that around. It doesn't have to be neat at all. It's just to give you a more neutral layer to paint on top. Now I like to use my palette knife just to clean up my palette a little bit. Sometimes you might also need to use a bit of tissue just to clean up that palette. Now when talking about warm and cool, I really am just talking about complementary. So you got your 3 primary colors. And if I add a bit of red to that yellow, of course it becomes a slightly orangey color. So red and yellow makes orange. And the complementary of that is, of course, blue. So if I put some red or some yellow around that orange color, nothing really jumps out. But the minute I put some blue there, you can really see the blue jump out there. And this is because the blue is the complementary of the orange. So with the 3 primaries, you just really have to think about what is not in the color, and that will be your complementary. So you can also think of warm, cool. So basically yellow or orange is warm, like fire. Blue is cool, like ice. One thing to remember with the primaries is that if you mix them all together, so all three, they end up looking pretty muddy. And that can be great if you want a bit of a muddy tone, but mostly you want to make sure to separate out and not mix all three together. So last week we made 3 tones. We had the light area of our palette to the right, then we had the medium area and the dark area to the left. So when I just mix these 3 tones up, we've got our dark, our mid and our light. And that's what we had last week. Now we can use this system, but instead of just adding color to this, I'm going to use pure color to create a light green, a medium green and a dark green. So keeping those tones that I already have as guides, I'm going to start with my yellow, pretty close to the medium. And then I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it. Now the blue is quite dark, so it will darken the mix. So I'm going to add some yellow to it and see if I get close to the value of that raw umber and white that I made earlier. And you can just squint between them, and when they start flowing into each other, you know you've got the right value. That looks pretty close. Now I can't go any lighter anymore, so I'm going to have to add a little bit of white. You can see that's really quite strong, but I try to just use white if I can't reach it with just the pure colors alone. So that seems now pretty similar. So that was just yellow, blue and white. Now for the darker color, the shadow, I'm going to again start with yellow and blue. Just by adding a bit more blue, I already have a pretty dark green. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, of course, the last one I need to make is the light. Just moving that up to make a bit more space. And again, starting with my yellow. And because of course I can't go any lighter, I'm going to have to add a bit of white to that. So again, only trying to add the white that I absolutely need. Otherwise, I try to stay off it. It can really grey your colors down. Same with the raw umber. They're very, very strong. So I try to just use the primaries if I can and just only use the white if I can't do anything else. So those are now my 3 colors. I've got dark, mid and light green. So that's the green, the cooler side. And of course now I need to do the same thing with the red. And I've just cleaned my palette a bit, and what I'm going to do is place the greens I've made further to the top so I can have some space for the red below. And this really, really works if you keep your lights on one end, your darks on the other, and try to keep everything fairly separate and fairly structured. It's much easier when you're painting, you don't have to search for the color, you know where it is. So the red doesn't need to be mixed by anything, it's complementary, it doesn't need blue, it's not purple, it's not orange. So all I'm going to do is add some raw umber to it to make it a bit darker for the shadows. Again, squinting from the from the red to the green to make sure it's the same value. Then red for the midtone, I think that's pretty good pure. And finally red with some white for the light. Okay, so really sorry for all of you who know oil paint, and this is 20 minutes in. We haven't really actually done any painting yet, but I just want to talk about how to mix colors, how to put it on your brush just before we get started. So I've now got my greens and my reds in 3 different values, and I can start to use these to paint. So going in with my brush, dipping it gently into the Sensidor, I'm going to start with my biggest value, which is the green. And I try to hold it at the end and just lay it down in one brush stroke. So I've got a different brush for my red as I do for my greens to make sure that they don't mix. So that red's a little bit too much. It needs to be muddied down. So in order to muddy it down, I can just mix it with that green that I've previously made. Now the red is quite strong, so I need to remix some of that green. And once I've remixed it, I can put it into my reds. So now my red's a little bit muddied. I can have a look if that looks better on the pear. So I go in with my palette knife, scrape off some of that paint. That's a really good habit to have, also because you don't want that paint muddying anything that you've already put down, that you're going to put down, sorry. And again, just put that on. And that looks a lot more natural. So those are the extremes. We've got our red, we've got our green. But of course, we have something in the middle there. So I can mix between that green that I previously did and that red. Now these two have muddied together a little bit. Of course, they go a bit darker because of that muddying effect. So I'm going to add a little bit of that lighter green in there to counteract that. And this is just what color mixing is. You try and keep it quite structured and try something out and then try the next thing. So really this is a color exercise. Don't worry too much about the drawing. That's why I chose the pear, just to get you into all the different elements of color mixing. So I now have a slightly brighter orange, so I can try that out on the actual canvas. Again, first scraping off the color that didn't quite work. Then going in with a little bit of Sensidor, just the tip of the brush, and placing it in one stroke. So now I've got the light sorted, I want to mix up my background because that's of course a very big element, and the colors of course always influence each other. So red, like I showed you earlier, orange next to orange doesn't really jump out, but orange next to blue does. So for my background I'm going to try and mix up quite a neutral color just with some raw umber and white and then build on that. And what I tend to do is just try it out. It looks way too dark, so I'm going to have to lighten that up considerably. And I always try to figure out the value first and then the color. So this is now a lot better in terms of value, but I think in terms of color it doesn't really do much. It doesn't really make the orange or the green jump out. So I'm going to make it cooler, meaning I'm going to make it a bit bluer. Okay, so I'm a lot happier with this. It's pretty neutral, but it's just a little bit cooler, which means that it will bring the colors out a little bit more in the pear. So I'm just going to cover this over the whole canvas. And the reason why I just cover the whole canvas at the start is because like I was saying, all of these colors just influence each other. So that means that all that raw umber I placed earlier will be influencing my pear. So the more bluish gray I put on there, the more the pear starts jumping out. And I'm just using a very, very light touch. I try to cross hatch and keep it all very, very flat and quite transparent, not very thick. Because you want the focus to be on the pear and not on the background. Now when you hit the outline of the pear, try and go over a little bit. So don't let the paint build up to each other and ridge. So very lightly you can go over. And this ensures that your pear feels like it's turning into the background and there's no ridges on the very end there. For the floor I just used a lighter version of that background grey. Now I've got a different brush again and I'm gonna start with my shadow. So taking my shadow mix and just putting that on, again trying to put it in one go and not do lots of little dabbing and just place it on the canvas. Now I also have, of course, a green shadow on the left. So the shadow I see at least is greener on the left than it is on the right. So on the right I see more of a red shadow. So I'm now going to add that greener shadow as well. And that interplay between green and red, or complementary colors, however you want to call it, that's what gives the painting a little bit of life. The minute you start muddying them into each other, which of course you have to do at some point, for instance what I'm doing now at the bottom of the pear, I have to let them muddy into each other in order to have a transition, but the more you can separate them out, the more vibrancy. Now the shadows are a little bit dark, so what you want to do is absolutely not add any white at this point, but instead add some color to the shadow. An often made mistake is to make the shadows way too heavy and grey, but actually you want a lot of luminosity in the shadow. So I've lightened it now with some pure yellow and try it on there, and it looks already a lot lighter. So there's some light reflecting back into that pear from the floor, kind of reflecting back into that pear. So again, not using white, I'm going to try and use color to try to keep my shadows quite vibrant. And one thing to remember is that the shadow should always be darker than any of the lights. This is just a general rule. This is something you can learn with drawing. Today we're doing colors, don't worry about it too much, but let's just focus on mixing those colors. You might find that you're losing the drawing a little bit, but try to just go back in, clean your brushes and redraw. And note that I try to only touch the canvas once and then clean my brush after I've touched that canvas. Now at this point the painting really starts. So we've got our canvas covered, we've got most of our mixes, they're roughly okay, and now we need to just perfect them. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that shadow below and just adjust my mix, add some in, and then adjust my mix again. Now at this point I also have a darkest dark, which is a shadow underneath the pear. Try to do some raw umber and a bit of green. I feel like that didn't quite work, so what I'm going to do is mix some blue with the raw umber, which will go really nice and inky black, and then put that on there. For those of you who watched last week, like we did last week, if you want to soften something, take a dry brush and just gently let it follow the contour, and that helps with softening one shape into the next. And this back and forth is quite normal with painting. It's also one of the reasons why painting in color is so hard. So I will continue doing some monochrome as well, just because it really helps with the handling. But the main thing is that if you have something wet and too wet, you really need brush control. So Alla Prima, which is what we're doing now, really teaches you how to control your brush. You can only touch the canvas once, no dabbing. The minute you start dabbing, your painting gets muddy. So now I'm reasonably happy with the bottom. I'm gonna redraw a bit at the top, just using some of my dark green with a bit of the red as well. And cutting into that background to make a really nice crisp dark edge. Another thing you can do with what I'm doing now is going in and cutting in with the background. So instead of trying to create the edge with the actual pear colors, I try to create the edge with the background colors, which is often easier because the background has less going on, so you don't have to have various different mixes and you can really cut in. And I know that Sargent, for instance, really spent a long time on his contours. They're one of the most important bits of the painting. So I spent a little bit of time just making sure it's nice and sharp, and other places will start losing later on. So spending a little bit more time on that contour, I've now got a nice sharp contour on the dark side, on the right side, pretty much figured out. And now I want to start working on the contour on the left side. Because there's some light coming from that direction, some reflected light, I know that that's going to be a little bit more lost. And what I'm doing is I'm just slightly lightening that reflected light until it feels roughly the same value as the background. And then I can go back in and reinstate some of that darker tone at the terminator of the pear. And you can see how much there is to juggle with painting. You have to make sure your brush strokes are clean. You have to know how you are drawing. The mixes have to be okay. The values have to be okay. So drawing, if you haven't done much drawing exercise yet, I really recommend our portrait and figure drawing videos because they will help you so much with the actual painting as well. So what I'm doing now is I take that contour I've just created and I want to make sure that some of it is lost, so I can go in with my brush and lose it a little bit into that shadow. Now the paint is pretty wet right now, so what I'm doing now is switching to synthetic brushes because they are a little bit sharper, so it's really nice for alla prima, so they really cut into the paint that I've previously laid down, whereas hog brushes can get a bit fluffy after a while. It's hard to get a bit of definition, so I'm just switching to pretty much all synthetics now and just reinstating the light shape. For the stock, all I do is go in my darkest dark, just try and figure out where it is and just put it in one touch. And I try to start my brush mark where I see the most darkness, and as I drag it away, it loses a little bit of that paint and therefore gets a bit thinner. And don't worry if it's not too accurate, it's a pair. Nobody's gonna be very critical about where the stock is located unless you're doing it in a really crazy place. So as long as it's looking okay, just leave it and move on to the next area. So I haven't really done my lightest light yet, so I'm going to go in and make sure that it's a very clean brush and just place it on there. I can always start muddying it up afterwards by just muddying a little bit with my brush, but it's a good idea to start very, very pure. And when I did that, I realized that my drawing is a little bit off. I need a bit more space in the light, so I'm going to move some of that general greenish light over a bit and then reinstate that highlight. So now that's looking a bit better, I can go in, make sure it's a nice clean brush, preferably a brush you haven't used before, get it in a pure mix and then put that down. And try to touch the canvas maybe only once. At this point I usually check if I'm happy with the colors and if I'm happy with the general light impression, and then what really starts happening now is I start what I think of as really painting. I start pushing all these muddy mixes around and adjust the drawing and adjust small changes in those pigments. But I've got basically everything in there. If I blur my eyes, I see a vague pair that I can see sort of works, and then all I need to do now is refine it. And again, like I was saying, we've got our greens on one side and of course our reds, and we want to make sure that that variety stays, but it slowly merges from one side to the next. So the way to do that is to just bring the greens and slowly let them dissolve into the reds, and then take the reds on the other hand and slowly let those dissolve into the greens. And you may have to do this a few times. Always start from the reddest area and then slowly drag it into the green area. Again, feel free to cut in with the background if you want to do a bit of drawing, sharpen up that contour. I like slowly moving my brush towards the pear, just to push it inwards. And what you can even do is let it dissolve at the bottom. So I'm just dragging that background into the rest of the pear, and it just makes it feel a little bit more less separate from the background. So with paint, it's actually a good thing to sometimes let things disappear into other things. As you can see, most of my time is spent refining what I already have rather than putting more detail on top. I found that whenever I have something that's good enough and I add some detail, it just never really makes it good. I've even gotten into the habit of just scraping down my paintings at the end of the day and just reinstating them next day. It always works much better than trying to just add little details and see if it gets any better. When the painting's not working, it's usually what you already have needs to be adjusted a little bit. If you end up making a mark you don't like I'm doing right now, just take your palette knife, scrape it off lightly and reinstate. And this is a little bit of discipline and can feel really uncomfortable at the start, but honestly it's made my work so much easier to handle. It feels like it's something you don't want to do, but actually it makes it a lot easier. And ultimately it's just a pear, so it's not a big deal if it doesn't quite work out. I also find it quite useful to just think, well, I'm just going to train myself and try and see what I can do, but no worries if the result isn't quite right. That being said, if you have a little bit of drawing ability, you can always reinstate whatever you just did, which didn't quite work out. So not a reason why it's a good idea to do these drawing exercises. Another fun mistake that I make here, which happens quite commonly, is going in with the wrong brush and just putting a bunch of white straight into the darks. Really annoying when that happens, but don't worry, again, just scrape it off, clean your brushes, maybe have a look at your palette if it's getting a bit muddy, clean it back up, and then reinstate. And this is something I like to call push and pull. You're just pushing some forms out and then you're pulling some other things back. And you can see the more you do that, it starts to feel like there's a little bit of form to that pear. Then periodically make sure to reinstate the light again. So make sure that, because as you paint and muddy things up, of course, stuff will get a little bit less bright, a little bit less colorful. So every so often, just go back in with your fresh, clean brush and just reinstate that light. Okay, so I think we're near the end of the hour. It's not the best pair I've ever done, but it was fun. So I hope you feel the same way and you had a bit of fun as well. And don't forget to hashtag your work with hashtag Raw Umber Challenge. And let us see what you come up with. Thank you again for taking part. Don't forget to hashtag your work on Instagram using the hashtag Raw Umber Challenge. Thanks again, and hopefully I will see you next video.
We run 2 sessions a week, a figure drawing session every Wednesday at 8 PM and portrait drawing every Sunday at 4 PM. You can find out more details on our website, rawumberstudios.com.